Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. The BYU versus Villanova game. BYU gets that win. Final score in the victory for BYU, 71-66. And I'll be honest, BYU, top 10 team, haven't really looked the part so far. Lost an exhibition in Nebraska. I know they were tinkering with lineups, didn't look great. Put away North Carolina, but it wasn't pretty. And they win this game in ugly fashion. But I'll say this, I think two things can be true. I think they could not be playing their best basketball. And I think there should be a lot of reason for excitement after what we saw on Monday night. I would add this as well. I've been around a lot of press conferences and media availabilities and whatever. And I think watching Kevin Young react to that game, the BYU head coach, it was much more, we're happy to have a win with a lot to work on, than we are worried that our whole team is overrated and, excuse me, that we're overrated and that we're not going to be able to meet our season goals. As a matter of fact, I think it's the opposite. I think they kind of think if we played that bad against a good Villanova team and we got to win, imagine what happens when it clicks. As far as the game itself, the biggest takeaway, listen, the two new additions, AJ Dybantsa, Rob Wright, as good as advertised. And listen, I know the shooting percentages weren't great. It was a game that was very physical at the rim. And what I mean by that is Dybantsa, Rob Wright, we were sitting as the media right behind the basket, and you could see the contact in the paint. Now, they called it both ways. I thought the refs were fine. So this isn't like a bash the ref segment, but I just bring it up because, statistically, BYU didn't shoot great. Statistically, Dybantsa shot 50% from the field, but I think there was a couple that could have been fouls, could have been and ones weren't called. Same with Rob Wright. But I think the big thing is when the game was on the line, those two dudes absolutely, positively took over. Okay. It was crazy. Like I said, I was sitting behind the basket and there was one play that I vividly remember. It was right. The game was either tied. BYU was maybe ahead by one, down by one, whatever, but they needed a basket. And I saw AJ Dybantsa bringing the ball up and I'm sitting there thinking, Rob Wright's on the court. I wonder why Dybantsa is taking the ball up. And I see Rob Wright almost like a wide receiver blocking in the open field with his arms up like that. I obviously can't do it with both arms because I have the mic in my hand. But Rob Wright's just kind of standing there with his arms up, and then, boom, AJ Dybantsa, right by him again, almost like like a running back, off of a guard's left hip or right hip or whatever. And that is, I think, who BYU is going to be. And I think part of that is the Kevin Young NBA stuff, right? Is that in the NBA really, at the end of the day, is all about exploiting mismatches and putting the ball in your playmakers' hands. And so I think that's the Kevin Young school of, hey, we got two guys that they can't stay in front of. We're just going to keep getting them the ball, keep getting them in ISO situations, keep getting them to the basket, and they're either going to get baskets, they're going to get fouled, they're going to get to the foul line, or it's going to get on the rim, and Keita is probably going to jump from the foul line like Superman and dunk it out of nowhere. And so that was, to me, the end of the game. Like I said, Dybantsa finishes with 21 points. Rob Wright, he quote-unquote only had 14 points. But to me, if you watch the game, I think 8 or 10 of those points probably had to come in about the last 7 or 8 minutes of the game. And so that's a positive. I'll say this, Keita has not missed a beat as a college basketball player. I had 2 or 3 plays that just, I said last year, Keita led the nation in a made-up stat that I created called cool-looking plays at the rim. He had plenty of those on Monday night, 8.7 rebounds, 3 blocks, including that back and forth where he had the putback dunk over like 7 dudes, then comes back down and blocks the shot into the 6th row. I didn't have time to have producer Matt pull the audio, but Dybantsa at the podium was like, I've been playing basketball a long time. I've never seen anything like what Keita did. So when the eventual potential number 1 pick in the draft, the potential number 1 pick in the draft says, I've never seen what that guy was doing. It shows you how special the night was. And then, I'll also say this about BYU. Last year, a lot of sizzle on offense. They just couldn't get stops on defense. They have the pieces to be really good defensively. It's interesting. Kevin Young has now said 2-3 times I've heard, just me, that I've heard in the offseason that he believes AJ Dybantsa can be the best defender in college basketball. It's on AJ Dybantsa. Well, we saw signs of that on Monday night. There was one play, again, being behind the basket. BYU was on the defensive end of the court where, the ball gets kicked out to the three-point line. Dybantsa jumps out with his hand out trying to defend it. The guy goes by him. Dybantsa turns, spins, puts his other hand up, and kept the guy from getting a look. I mean, it was a pretty impressive play, but KY thinks he could be the best defensive player in college basketball. Who am I to disagree? And then beyond that, Kennard Davis, I think, is going to add an element. Statistically, he's not a guy that's necessarily going to jump out, but it doesn't change the fact that he adds an element that I don't think they had last year defensively. And so to me, if you want to look at it, I think there were a lot of positives. Now, the one negative, listen, you can see on the screen, Richie Saunders did have 16 points. Richie Saunders, the tater top man, he does not look like the Richie Saunders from last year. It felt pretty obvious that he was pressing. I looked over to the bench after he came out at one point, and he was kind of had his head down a little bit. And I don't think it was a negative. I'm mad about, my team. I think he was just frustrated with his play. And so I think that's, again, to me, a little bit of a positive. You just beat Villanova. Richie Saunders did not play well. And I think it's going to take him time to adjust. I mean, this was an all Big 12 first team guy last year, was in the conversation for Big 12 Player of the Year. And I think it's going to take him a second to learn how to play with two other really good players and really good offensive players in Rob Wright and AJ Dybantsa. Now, what I think is interesting is I think it's kind of on him because, one, you go back to what Kevin Young told him when he decided to come back. Kevin Young said it on this show, and producer Matt and I went out to Provo. He said, I coached Devin Booker and Kevin Durant together, and we need Richie Saunders to be our Devin Booker. We need Richie Saunders to be the guy that accepts being the number two, and his life will never be easier. It's going to be easier for him to get 20 this year than last year because of all the pressure that AJ and Rob Wright are going to put on other people. So I think Richie, listen, I don't know. I'm not saying he hasn't bought in, but I think it is an adjustment for him. But again, I think you can look at that as a positive if you're a BYU fan. BYU finished the game. Richie Saunders played fine, but not great. As a team, you shot 5 of 17 from 3. Now, Kevin Young said after the game, it wasn't necessarily the strategy. It was just that was how the game played out. They assumed that that Villanova would pack the paint a little bit more and that BYU would shoot more threes, but that didn't happen. They were able to get to the rim. And so you shoot 5 of 17 from 3. I saw a stat at one point, they were 12 of 27 on layups. Now, again, admittedly, part of that was physicality at the rim. Couple plays could have probably been called fouls. They weren't. And so that's a positive. 5 of 17 from 3. Missed a bunch of gimmies. Missed a couple free throws at the end. And you still beat a pretty good Villanova team that I think is going to be in contention for a tournament bid when it's all said and done. By the way, quickly on Nova, I know this is probably mostly a BYU segment. I think Nova looked better than I thought. As you can see, Bryce Lindsey played very well, transparently was not really familiar with his game. And I'll say this, sort of a positive for the Big East. We've been trying to figure out, what is the depth? Is there depth behind UConn, St. John's, and Creighton? Well, Georgetown went to Rupp and looked pretty darn good. I thought Villanova held their own. Maybe those are two teams that are on the fringes of the tournament. Now, all of a sudden, you're talking 5-6 bids as opposed to 3 or 4. But BYU gets the win. And I think it's a positive. You have a lot of stuff to work on, but you got the victory. And I'll defer to Kevin Young because in the press conference, he did not look like a coach that was pissed that they only won by 7. Only won by 6. I think 5. Okay, the math sucks, whatever. They only won by 5. I think it was the opposite. I think he was happy to have won by 5, knowing how much better they could have played.